What's up, kings and queens? It's your boy Dan from Daft Previews, and I'm back here once again for another comprehensive preview for this 10-game slate. And in this video, I'll be going through all your favorite NBA player prop lines, their forms, their matchups. We're talking about their odds and the likelihood of these bets hitting. Now, I do all this to make sure that you have all the information you need to make informed betting decisions so you don't burn a hole in your pocket. Whether you want to play parlays, multi, same gamers, straight bets, I got you covered, my boy. So we're going to get into it. We're going to get busy. I use this type of research and analytics to have a very profitable day. For those of you who watched my last video, you would have seen I did a deep dive on the two games that were on today. I played 7 bets. We finished with 6.78 units profit. We hit Jaylen Brown over in first quarter points, Jason Tatum over 4.5 assists, Drew Holiday, we hit at 15 points. We had Holiday's over in rebounds and assists, and we cashed a Domantas Sabonis over 22.5 rebounds and assists. So an excellent day. It's going to be a long video, so strap yourself in. 10 games to get through. So I'm asking that you like the video right now. Sub to the channel if you haven't. Now let's go. So we're jumping into outlier.bet to sort through all of this data. I do have a free 7-day trial for anybody who wishes to use this tool. The link for that is in the description box below. We're kicking things off with the Philadelphia 76ers versus the Cleveland Cavaliers. Before I get started, I want to talk about some injuries and lineups in this game. The first thing you need to keep in mind for the 76ers, obviously Joel Embiid is still out. Mo Bamba's a game time decision. And for the Cavs, no one real notable is missing in this one. So a lot of player prop lines are available and we're ready to run with it. First thing we're going to start off with is Tyrese Maxey. So we're looking at his points prop here. Now, Outlier is telling us, suggesting the under in this one, and that's because his points line's at 26.5. He's hit this in only 3 of his last 10 games. So he's gone under 7 out of his last 10. In terms of the head-to-head matchup, he's gone under 2 out of his last 3 games against the Cleveland Cavaliers. In terms of the matchup, the Cleveland Cavaliers allow the 8th fewest points to point guards. So definitely leaning the under on this one so far. If you're a wise man, without Embiid, Maxey's gone under his points line, I think like 80% of the time or something like that. So definitely the under's the lean for Tyrese Maxey. Let's have a look at his assist. His line is 5.5. And he's covered that in 5 of his last 10 games. In terms of his matchup, the Cavs allow the first fewest. They allow the least assists to point guards across the season. So a very difficult matchup. And in terms of how he's gone against Cleveland, he's hit this in 1 out of his last 3 games. So leaning the under on the assist side of things. So I think if you're just looking at his key props, it's points and assists. You can see he's got a difficult matchup for both. He's only hit his points and assist line in 4 out of his last 10 games. Going back to his last 20 games, he's hit this 9 of his last 20. And in terms of his matchups, he's hit this 1 out of his last 3 games against the Cleveland Cavaliers. But also keeping in mind, he's only versed them once this season. And in that game, he had 30 points and 6 assists. I doubt he can do that again. So my lean is for the under. But given it's a 10-game slate, we've got a lot of players to get through, taking unders. That's not going to be on the menu for me today, let me say it. We'll stick with the 76ers players real quick, and I'll get to the key props, really, because there's so many to get through. Kelly Oubre, let's look at his points prop. His line's at 15.5. He's covered this in 7 out of his last 10 games, which is quite remarkable. Kelly Oubre playing quite well lately. In terms of his matchup, Kelly Oubre, I think he's starting at the 4, really, in this game, but they're playing quite a small lineup. You could say he's a 3, you could say he's a 4, you could say he's a 2, because he really is a versatile wing. So I'm not going to put too much emphasis on the matchup, because as you can see, shooting guards have a difficult matchup against them. Small forwards have an easy matchup against them, and power forwards have a difficult matchup too. So positional rankings for this Philadelphia team, the way that it's set at the moment, they got Maxey, Hield, Tobias Harris, Kelly Oubre, and then Paul Reed. So just taking it for what it is, he's hit this in 7 out of his last 10. He's yet to verse the Cleveland Cavaliers in a Sixers uniform, so we can't really look at the form in that one. But what's most notable, if we just check his minutes real quick, he's playing 32.7 minutes in his last 10 games. He's taking 14.8 shot attempts per game. Looking at the games where he's gone under, Golden State Warriors twice and the Indiana Pacers. In those games, took 14 shots here, 15 shots here, and only 5 shots against the Pacers. So It is a road game, so real quick, let's check that out for Kelly Oubre. Looking at his last 10 road games, he's covered this in 4 out of his last 10, but 4 out of his last 5 road games. So, look, potentially at 15 points, I don't mind that. But if we just check his last 10 games again to see what we're up against here, he's hit this quite well. 7 out of his last 10, 4 out of his last 5 road games, he's covered this point slide. And the matchup may be a difficult one, so I'm a little bit uncertain about Kelly Oubre, but I'll leave that up to you to decide. Tobias Harris, I personally don't like betting on this guy. He always seems to burn me, but let's check out his points, rebounds, and assist prop real quick. Points-wise, his line's at 20.5. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. Last game against the Cavs, he scored 23, but he did go under in the 3 games prior. Looking at his assists, his line is at 3.5. He's hit that in 5 of his last 10. Against the Cavs, he's gone under in his assist prop in every single game. And if we look at his rebounds, he's hit this in only 3 out of his last 10 games. And his last 4 matchups against the Cavs, he's gone under in that as well. So we're talking rebounds and assists. He's probably gone under more often than not. Points-wise, he does turn it on from time to time. So if we were looking at unders, probably looking at a rebound and an assist prop. But if you're looking at rebounds and assists, he's actually hit this in 5 of his last 10. So that's not good. But he's gone under in all 4 games against the Cleveland Cavaliers. So, yeah, look, I'm a little bit on the fence on Tobias. If I choose to bet on him, he usually goes under. And if I fade him, he most likely goes over. So that could be a little bit difficult. Let's check Buddy Hield. His points line is at 13.5. I think he only played the 1 game for the Philadelphia 76ers. Scored 23 points. But he's covered this in 3 out of his last 10 games. Yet to get a head-to-head matchup here against them in his new uniform. But in terms of the matchup, the Cavs allow the second fewest points to shooting guards. Let's check his 3-point market real quick because Buddy Hield is a sniper. His line's at 2.5. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. And the Cleveland Cavaliers allow the 7th fewest 3-pointers made to shooting guards. So I think if you take the under on this, you'll probably get plus money. But once again, not a big fan of unders. So I think the Cavs will do a good job of really limiting some of these 76ers players, but I just can't tell you who it's going to be. Most likely Maxey, his line is the highest. Even if they all chip in, yeah, Maxey probably be the one that I think about the most, but yeah, the numbers aren't really screaming out to me at this point. Let's have a look at Donovan Mitchell, though. Point signs at 26.5. He's covered this in 7 out of his last 10 games. Philadelphia, smack bang in the middle of the league, 15th in points allowed to shooting guards. In head-to-head matchups, Donovan Mitchell's covered this in 1 out of his last 3 games against the Philadelphia 76ers. This is a home game for the Cavs, so if we check his last 10 home games, check that out. He's hit this in 7 out of his last 10 home games, and he's hit this in 6 consecutive home games. Donovan Mitchell, his 2 home games against Philly, 18 and 21 points, though. So his form is good at home, but his form against Philly, not so good. Checking his assist prop, his line is at 6.5. The 76ers allow the 7th most assists to shooting guards. He's covered this in 5 of his last 10, but he has gone under in 4 consecutive games. Against the 76ers, he's gone under in 3 consecutive games. If you're just looking at his assist prop. So Darius Garland is back. He's playing a bit more minutes. Donovan Mitchell doing slightly less playmaking, relying more on his scoring form. So those are probably the 2 main props that you'd look at. We can have a quick look at his rebounds prop. His rebounds prop is at 4.5. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10. He's hit this in 2 out of his last 3 against Philly. And matchup-wise, the 76ers allow the 10th fewest rebounds to shooting guards. So, yeah, I rarely bet on Donovan Mitchell. His lines are always quite high. An excellent player, don't get me wrong, but it's really hard to pick the right game for him to really explode. But some Cavs players that are probably worth it, Jared Allen, Evan Mobley. They're the main ones. If I was going to bet on Cavs players, it's usually these 2 guys. But let's check Jared Allen. Points-wise, his line's at 17.5. The 76ers allow the 5th most points to centers this season. Obviously don't have any Embiid, so they're potentially leaking even more. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10 games. In head-to-head matchups, he scored 26 in their most recent matchup this year and 12 points the game prior. Looking at his last 10 home games, we can see that Jared Allen's covered this in 5 out of his last 10 games. So line at 17.5. Look, it's probably one of the highest lines you're going to see for Jared Allen. I know the matchup is probably good, but yeah, I'm a little bit hesitant to take Jared Allen at that points prop. But let's have a look at his rebound line. That's at 11.5. The 76ers allow the 13th fewest rebounds to centers. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. Head-to-head matchups, he had 13 in his last matchup against them and 7 prior. So even with Jared Allen, over 11.5, that's quite a difficult one for me. He had 15 against the Raptors, but the Raptors barely even have any centers. The Spurs, they absolutely leak rebounds. So outside of that, has had some pretty easier matchups in here and hasn't got it done. So, yeah, I'm a little bit hesitant to take any bets on Jared Allen at those lines. Evan Mobley, he started to pull it out. We'll check his points and his rebounds prop, but then we'll even check his minutes as well. His points props at 14.5. In terms of matchup, the 76ers allowed the 10th fewest points to power forwards. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. Last 4 games against Philly, he's covered this in 3 of those games. Important to note, he averaged 34.2 minutes in those matchups. Looking at his last 10, going to his minutes, we can see when he came back from injury, he's playing 20 minutes per night. That's slightly gone up, so he's playing between 25 and 27 minutes a game. He's not back up to playing the mid-30s, but he's definitely on the way up. So he's exceeded 13.5 points in 4 of his last 5 games, which is pretty positive. But yeah, look, I'm still a little bit hesitant to take Evan Mobley, especially given he's going to be on that minutes restriction still. Looking at his rebound prop, though, he has had some pretty stellar games. Line's at 8.5. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 5 and 6 out of his last 10. In terms of the matchup, it's great. The 76ers allow the 6th most rebounds to power forward. Now, this is something that I can fuck with because we know in all these games he's been playing reduced minutes. Line's only at 8.5, but even though his line's at 8.5, Jared Allen's at 11.5. We can see over the last 5 games, Evan Mobley's been out rebounding Jared Allen. In terms of head-to-head matchups, he's done it quite well. He's covered this in 3 out of the last 4 games against the Philadelphia 76ers. Checking the minutes in those games, 23, 35, 39, and 38. So he's only going to play 25 to 27 minutes. In this game where he finished on 8, played 23 minutes. So, and looking at his last 10, even if we just drill down to the last 5, right? Spurs, Kings, Wizards, Nets, and Raptors. In those games, he was only 23, 27, 25, 25, and 27 minutes per game. So if we can get 25 to 27 minutes, we can see that he's covered this quite easily. So the matchup is good. 76ers allow a lot of rebounds to power forwards. He's going to have a significant size advantage, whether it's Kelly Oubre or Tobias Harris. I don't mind this for Evan Mobley. Rebounds prop. I'm taking a mental note for that one. Let's have a look at Darius Garland. We'll check his minutes as well. His line's at 15.5. He's gone under. So he played, I think this is the return. He came back against Detroit, scored 19 points, and he's failed to cover his points line ever since. In terms of matchup, the 76ers allow the 4th fewest points to point guards. In head-to-head matchups, he's actually covered this in 3 out of his last 4 games against the 76ers. Looking at his minutes, very similar to Evan Mobley's, starting to see a lift. Started with 20 minutes a night. It's gone up to about 28 minutes per night. And in those 28 minutes, let's check to see how many shots he's taking up. So let me go to his last 5. So over his last 5 games, he's playing 27 minutes per game and he's attempting 8.6 shots per game. So the volume really isn't there. If he's taking 8 shots, we need him to score 16 points. So we really need a higher shooting percentage. He's only taking 2 free throws per game. He's only shooting 18% from downtown. So his shooting percentage is actually quite low. So unless you think he's going to have a better, more volume, but also a higher percentage, really lean to taking the under. The matchup will be somewhat difficult, and I think they can get points from elsewhere. So I'm all for fading Darius Garland at the moment. But looking at his assist prop, though, it's 5.5. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. He has gone over in his last 2, which is good. 76ers allow the 11th fewest assist point guards. Looking at head-to-head matchups, he's also covered this in 3 out of his last 4. So I think his points prop had the very same form. The same games he's gone over in points and in assists against the Philadelphia 76ers. Darius Garland, he's still on that minutes restriction. His recent form makes me hesitant. His form against the opponent is good, but the matchup's also quite difficult. So I don't know what to do with that information. I think looking at this game, probably the rebounds for Evan Mobley. That probably gives me a little bit of confidence. Outside of that, given that they've got new players in the Philadelphia 76ers, I wouldn't be overly confident taking anybody within that game. Looking at the Indiana Pacers now against the Charlotte Hornets, Halliburton, game time decision again. Caleb Martin, game time decision. Or is that Cody Martin? Actually, game time decision. LaMelo's still out, and Mark Williams is still out for the Charlotte Hornets. So we'll kick it off with Pascal Siakam in this one. Looking at his points prop, it's at 20.5. Hornets not great defensively, but they do a decent job against power forwards. Against power forwards, it's the 13th fewest points against power forwards this season. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10 games. His last matchup against the Charlotte Hornets, he did score 25. Now, Pascal Siakam, I think he's got a great record scoring against the Charlotte Hornets, just in general in his career. But last 2 games, he has gone under. Some sort of struggles. He's still playing 31 minutes. He's only took 11 to 13 shot attempts. So I think the considerable difference now that he's with the Pacers, he's taking less shots compared to when he was a Toronto Raptor, but you can assume that he's shooting a higher percentage of shots. So points-wise for Siakam, I don't know. I'm a little bit hesitant. 20.5. I think a lot of people expect this to be a high-scoring game, but usually when these two teams meet, it tends to go under. So, but checking his assist prop, his line is 3.5. The matchup, the Charlotte Hornets allow the 10th most assists to power forwards. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10 games. He had 9 assists in that last game against Charlotte. But I do believe, let me just double check to see if Halliburton was playing in that game. Halliburton was playing in that game, actually. So I just did games without Tyrese, and it came up with nothing. So that means Tyrese was playing that game, and he got a lot of assists against the Charlotte Hornets. Looking at his rebound prop, though, that's at 6.5. Tough matchup against the Hornets. You go with the 5th fewest rebounds to power forwards. In his last 10, he's hit this in 5 out of those last 10. And his last game against the Charlotte Hornets, wearing a Pacers uniform, he had 8 rebounds as well. So, look, it's only one game against the Hornets, so I wouldn't make a big deal out of that. I think there are better opportunities on the board. Players like Pascal Siakam, their lines are usually quite sharp. His form's a little bit, it's somewhat consistent, but it's not predictable. I hope that makes sense. But nothing about Pascal Siakam screaming out to me at the moment. Aaron Naismith, this guy always seems to scream out to me. I've had a bit of success on him, but let's take a look. His points line's at 13.5. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. In terms of matchups, Charlotte Hornets allow the most points to small forwards this season. 6 out of his last 10. These are his games against the Hornets, and these 2 games were this year, which is pretty crazy. Well, he's played 3 games against them this year. My apologies. 4 points, then promoted to the starting lineup, 19 points and 22 points. So he's had a lot of success against the Charlotte Hornets this year. In terms of the matchup, they still leak a lot of points. Looking at his last 10, he's gone under in his last 3. Rockets, Warriors, Knicks. I believe he would have had a difficult matchup against the Knicks and the Rockets. The Warriors are somewhat easy matchup. Seen a slight decrease in his minutes. Shot attempts, you need more than 7 shot attempts in order for him to make this. Because against the Hornets, check this out. 6 from 6 in this game, 8 from 11 in this game. So it's not like he's putting up a ton of shots. He's just shoots a very high percentage against them. So that's his points prop. Given him volume, I'm probably not too supportive of taking that pick, but the matchup is good. In terms of his rebounds, his line's at 4.5. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10. The Charlotte Hornets allow the 8th most rebounds to small forwards. In his head-to-head matchups, had 8 rebounds against them when they last matched up. Prior to that, he's gone under in 3 consecutive games. So even Naismith, I'm not feeling a tingle from him from this game. So let's move on to the next one. Let's have a look at Miles Turner real quick. Points and rebounds. We know they're going to have a good matchup against the Charlotte Hornets. Points-wise, line's at 17.5. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. The Hornets allow the 3rd most points to centers on the season. Now, Miles Turner, he's covered this in 4 out of his last 6 games against the Charlotte Hornets. His last matchup, he only scored 16. So line at 17.5. I've got to tell you, it feels like it's just about right. This is a road game for the Pacers. So checking out how he goes on the road, we can see that he's only covered this in 3 out of his last 10 road games. So, yeah, a little bit hesitant to take Miles Turner on that one. But let's have a look at his rebound prop. That's at 7.5. The matchup is good. Hornets allow the 3rd most rebounds to centers on the season, but he's only hit this in 3 out of his last 10 games. And against the Hornets, he's only covered this in 3 out of his last 6. So Yeah, it's hard to take someone like Miles Turner for either of these props. The matchup is very good, but then we see lines a lot higher than he'd normally hit. So, yeah, it's a no go from me. But let's check our man Tyrese Halliburton. We'll check to see how many minutes he's playing firstly. So last game he played 30 minutes, which is pretty good. Prior to that, 25, 29. Then he had 4 games just over 20. So safe to say that he's starting to recover, I guess, from that injury. So hopefully we can get at least 30 minutes from him tonight. Looking at his points prop, it's at 19.5. He's only covered this in 2 out of his last 10 games. Scored 17 points in his last matchup against the Hornets. Prior to that, he had 19 and then 43 in their first matchup this year. So he has gone under in 2 straight games against the Hornets. Matchup wise, the Hornets allow the 13th fewest points to point guards. So let's jump into his assists. His assist prop is at 11.5, so close to close to his season average, isn't it? So he's only hit this in 2 out of his last 10 games. The Hornets allow the 17th fewest assists to point guards. And his last matchup against the Hornets, he only had 4 assists. Prior to that, 13, 12, 13, and 11. So, look, personally for me, until he's back paying his full complement of minutes, I would not take him at 11.5 assists. That is just crazy. He'll probably play about 30 minutes in this game, although he's capable of hitting this. Yeah, I just feel like that's such a high line. It is for plus money, though, so that could get me tempted, but the matchup isn't that strong. He's done it before, but we know he's playing less minutes. So I'm going to pause on Tyrese Halliburton until we get to see more game time and more minutes from him. But now looking at these Charlotte Hornets, they've got Trey Mann, who's a new starting point guard. They still got B. Miller, Miles Bridges. So let's have a look at who's available. Let's check out Brandon Miller. His points prop is at 19.5. He's gone under in his last 2. We did take him for an under against Memphis, and we cashed that. But looking at him, I think he's lining up as a 3 now in this game. We can see the matchup is pretty decent. The Pacers allow the 3rd most points to small forwards. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. He absolutely murdered the Pacers last time and the time before that. So he scored 35 in his last matchup against Indiana, 21 points prior to that. So I think at first glance, I'll start to lean the over in this one, but I just want to check his minutes. So his last 2 games, he only played 29 and 30 minutes. Field goal attempts, he only took 9 shots against the Memphis Grizzlies. He made 7 of them, which is great, but that was the first game with a lot of these new players for Charlotte. So the question here is the matchup is good, but now that the Charlotte Hornets probably have a little bit more depth, is Brandon Miller going to take enough shots to cover this 19.5? And that's what I'm a little bit unsure of. Now, he has exceeded 19.5 points in 5 of his last 6 games at home, which is great. Check this out. This is just his home games. Pretty good. 5 out of his last 6. But, again, if I wasn't doing research, I'd probably back this, right? But knowing that he took such minimal shots against the Memphis Grizzlies, is that because of how the Memphis Grizzlies played defense on him? Or is that because we had new players in the lineup and the ball's being shared between a lot of them? So that makes me a little bit hesitant to take Brandon Miller. Although the matchup is great, the form line is great too, but I'll leave that up to you to decide. I'm personally not willing to take the risk, especially with such a large slate. Nick Richards, let's quickly check him out because up against centers, average matchup, Pacers allowing the 13th fewest points to centers. Nick Richards did cover this line his last matchup against the Pacers. He scored 12 points. Yep, 12 points there. But the main thing I wanted to see is his rebound prop. His line's at 8.5. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10. The Pacers allow the 6th fewest rebounds to centers. Despite that, he pulled down 10 rebounds in their last matchup against Indiana. So, yeah, I'm not feeling Nick Richards on that one either. Let's check out Miles Bridges. So his points line is at 25.5. So without even looking, I can tell you that the Indiana Pacers allow a lot of points to power forwards. And we can see it there. 3rd most points to power forwards on the season. Now, just because the matchup is good doesn't mean Miles Bridges is going to score against them. He's only covered this line in 3 out of his last 10. And we can see he only scored 19 points against the Indiana Pacers in their last matchup. In fact, in both matchups this year, he's gone under 20 points both times. Looking at his last 10 games, so he scored 25 points against the Memphis Grizzlies, which is pretty decent. In that game, 38 minutes, but he only attempted 13 shots. So he made 11 out of 13. So very similar to Brandon Miller, new players joined the team and everybody was getting a touch. So Miles Bridges saw a massive reduction in his shot attempts, same as Brandon Miller. So I think, do they do much of the same? Does everybody get a touch? I doubt that he can shoot 85% from the field again. I know the matchup is great, but looking at his last two games against the Indiana Pacers, you can see that he's attempted 17 and 23 shots in those games. And in those games, he scored 19 points. So he shot 47% and 35% from the field. So I don't know if they're going to let him shoot over 80% the way that he did against the Memphis Grizzlies. But I personally probably leaning on the under here for Miles Bridges. I just feel like that's too high for somebody who's quite an inconsistent scorer. So now that he's got a deeper team, I don't think he's going to get the volume that he really needs. Let's check Trey Mann, though. He played that one game against the Memphis Grizzlies. That was his first game. And I just want to check to see his activity. So he played 27 minutes, and he attempted 11 shots. That's probably the most shots that he's attempted all year. So on 11 shots, he made 4 of them, and he scored 9 points. So that's 11 shots that Miles Bridges and Brandon Miller probably won't be taking. And who knows, with other outs, he might see more because in terms of matchup, it's not the greatest or the worst. Assist-wise, let's check to see. He got his lines at 5.5 assists. He had 9 assists against the Memphis Grizzlies, and I know that would have been a difficult matchup. But the Indiana Pacers allow the third fewest assists to point guards on the season. So line at 5.5. He did have 9 in that last game against Memphis. You probably have to check his potential assists to see if there's still value in this, but then you'd be making a call really based off one game. So I personally would wait on Trey Mann or making out of any other picks. But if I take a step back and I look at this game, if I was to choose a favorite, it'd probably be Miles Bridges unders. And it might even be under in his points and rebounds. I didn't check his rebounds. Now, let me double check that. His rebound line is at 7.5. He had 6 rebounds in his last matchup against the Pacers. The Pacers do allow the 10th most rebounds to power forwards, but in 2 games this year, Miles Bridges has gone under his rebound line both times. So he's gone under his rebound line both times, and he's gone under his points line both times. And assist, his line's at 3.5. He also went under in that too. So if you want, you might even look at a full PRA and take the under for Miles Bridges. So that's 37.5. He got 26 and 28 in both games against the Pacers this year. Looking at his last 10, he's only covered this 3 times. And in those games, he scored 45 points, 41 points, and 30 points. So in this game, he had 30 points, 15 rebounds, and 5 assists. So outside of that, if you look at his last 20, he's still only covered this 4 in his last 20 games. My Lord. Put that in. I'm putting the bet on right now. We'll take a Miles Bridges under in his PRA if it's still 37.5, and it's moved down to 36.5 on my sportsbook. So I might hesitate for a second. All right, I've done a little bit of line shopping, and on Bet365, I was able to get his under 37.5 PRA. So Miles Bridges, lock that in. So let's jump into the next game, shall we? We're looking at the Toronto Raptors versus San Antonio Spurs. And in this game, no major out. So everybody's lining up the way that you thought they would. Let's have a look at their plays. We'll start off with the Toronto Raptors. Look at Scotty Barnes firstly. His points line is at 21.5. He's lining up at power forward in this one. And in terms of the matchup, the Spurs allow the 16th fewest points to power forward. So they're pretty much smack bang in the middle. Scotty's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. Head-to-head games against the Spurs. He did score 30 against them earlier this season, which is pretty positive. But I haven't been a big fan of Scotty props since Pascal Siakam got traded. This is a home game for the Raptors, though, so let's check him out at home. Last 10 games at home, he's covered in 6 out of his last 10, 4 out of his last 5 games. So that form's not too bad. If we're looking at his assist prop, it's at 6.5. San Antonio allow the 10th most assists to power forwards. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10. He had 6 assists in their last matchup against the Spurs, which was this season. And then looking at his last 10 games at home, we can see that he's covered this line in 5 out of his last 10. So, yeah, somewhat inconsistent. The matchup is okay. But again, I'm a little bit hesitant on Scotty. His rebounds, that's at 7.5. He's had 10 rebounds in 2 consecutive games. The Spurs allow the 13th fewest rebounds to power forwards on the season. Head-to-head matchups, he did have 11 rebounds in his last matchup against them, which is the only matchup they played this year. Looking at his last 10 games at home, his rebounding form is he's hitting 6 out of his last 10. So, look, still somewhat inconsistent. I don't have a strong read on this one, on whether Scotty's going to have a big game or not. His points, rebounds, and assist props, they're all over the place at the moment. So, I'd prefer not to play with Scotty. Having a look at Jakob Poeltl, though. Now, he has an excellent matchup. It is up against his old team, for those of you who didn't know. In terms of points, you can get his prop at 11.5 for plus money, but you can also get his prop for 10.5 as well. The Spurs allow the second most points to centers on the season. Jakob Poeltl's covered this in 7 out of his last 10 games. Head-to-head matchups with his old team. Scored 16 points against them earlier this year, so I do like that. Checking out his last 10 games at home, we can see he's covered this in 5 out of his last 10. But he has had some time off. So these games here were back in December. This is one game in January, and then he's had 2 home games so far in February. So more recently, he's been doing okay. Looking back at that, I want to check his minutes real quick. So 7 out of his last 10. On average, he's playing 29.7 minutes per game. Only played 21 minutes against the Cleveland Cavaliers. I want to see in that last matchup against the Spurs, played 28.5 minutes. He attempted 10 shots and he made 8 of them. Looking at his last 10 games, he's taking on average 8 shots and he's making 5.3. So Jakob Poeltl shoots a very high percentage inside. He's done it against Wemby in the past. So can he do it against Wemby again? Probably. Let's take out his rebounds prop because that's a good matchup too. The Spurs allow the 5th most rebounds to centers this season. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. His line is 9.5. And in his last game against the Wemby and the Spurs, he had 10 rebounds. So I think the points prop, definitely the way to go here. I do like the points prop a little bit better than the rebound prop. Obviously, his form more recently is a lot better. He's convincingly hit the over against the Spurs in the past. And I don't think they have enough to stop him. They've been leaking points to centers all season. So, yeah, I do like Jakob Poeltl for points, but let's just sit on that for a minute. Quickly check his assist prop because he's a good passer out of the post. But 2.5 is his line, and he's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. Spurs actually allow the 3rd fewest assists to centers. So, won't be touching Jakob Poeltl's assists, but definitely points so far for Jakob Poeltl. That's got me somewhat aroused. Let's check out RJ Barrett. So, RJ Barrett, his line's at 21.5. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. San Antonio Spurs allow the 12th fewest points to small forwards. Hasn't versus the San Antonio Spurs in a Raptors uniform just yet, so we can't look at that form. But we can see he's hit this quite decently over his last 10. This is a game at home. So RJ Barrett at home has only hit this in 4 out of his last 10. So that makes me a little bit hesitant. If we take a look at his assist prop, his line is at 3.5. He's hit this in 7 out of his last 10 games. Looking at his home games, he's hit this in 4 out of his last 10 home games. So at home, seems to play a little bit worse, doesn't he? Rebounds, his line's at 5.5. San Antonio Spurs allow the 7th most rebounds to small forwards. Now, he's hit his rebound prop in 8 of his last 10 games, but this is minus 140, so probably not a play that I would take. But if we look at his last home games, last 10, he's hit this in 8 out of his last 10 home games. So definitely RJ Barrett rebounds is a good pick, but at minus 140, I don't know if you guys would be up for playing that. That would probably be a leg that I put into a parlay. You take RJ Barrett 4.5 or 5.5, take it with something else. But we shall see. Emmanuel quickly, let's have a quick look at him. Points lines at 17.5. In terms of the matchup, the Spurs allow the 5th most points to point guards on the season. Now, he's only hit this in 3 out of his last 10, yet to versus Spurs in a Raptors uniform. His last 10 home games, he's covered this line in only 3 out of his last 10 home games and 3 out of his last 10 games overall. The matchup is good, but he hasn't hit this number very well. Looking at his assist prop, the line's at 5.5. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10 games. Spurs do allow the 9th most points to assists to point guards. His last 10 home games, he's only hit this in 2 out of his last 10. So, yeah, look, the matchup is quite good, but man, Emmanuel Quickly's been inconsistent as hell. I wouldn't feel comfortable taking Emmanuel Quickly prop right now. Looking at the Spurs players, let's have a look at Wembanyama. Points line, he's at 22.5. He's actually gone under this in 7 consecutive games. In terms of the matchup, the Toronto Raptors allow the 10th most points to centers on the season, so the matchup is somewhat decent. His last matchup against the Raptors, he scored 20 points. He played 37.9 minutes and he attempted 16 shots. So he just shot a very poor percentage. So the matchup is decent, but he's gone under quite often, 7 straight, and he went under his last game against the Raptors. I'm not saying that will continue, but that is enough for me to say I probably don't want to touch a Wembanyama points prop. But let's check out his rebound prop. That's at 10.5. The Raps allow the 10th most rebounds to centers. He struggled in his last two, Brooklyn and Orlando. Both of those are very difficult matchups, though. And his last matchup against them, he had 9 rebounds against the Raptors. And he played 38 minutes in that game. He's not playing 38 minutes anymore. So he's playing less minutes than he was the last time they played. I don't know. Victor may struggle in this game. What I do want to look at, though, is his blocks. Probably just steals and blocks because he does a bit of both. Check that out. Now, his steals and block line, over 3.5, you can get that at plus 100. He's hit this in 8 of his last 10 games, which is quite good. And in that last matchup against the Toronto Raptors, he had 1 steal and 5 blocks. So Wemby over 3.5 blocks and steals. Man, I might be able to fuck with that for a second. This is a road game, so let's check his last 10 road games. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 road games, which makes it a little bit more difficult, but I don't mind this at all. And having a look, he does get a fair few steals, but blocks is definitely where he's generating the majority of these. So if we just look at his block line, that's at 2.5, and you can still get that for plus money. He's hit that in 5 of his last 10. And then looking at away games, he's also hit that in 5 of his last 10. So yeah, not the most convincing one I can see. Steals and blocks, that looks pretty good looking at his last 10. But then on the road, it's a little bit different. So at home, he's an absolute beast. We can see the only games he's only covered in out of all these games, these are all home games. The Miami one where he goes under is a road game. Orlando goes over in a road game. Nets goes under in a road game. So look, if this was a home game, I'd definitely be taking Wemby over steals and blocks based off what I'm seeing. But look, his away form's a little bit shaky in that category. So I'm a little bit hesitant to pull the trigger on that one. Devin Vassell, let's take a look at him. His points props at 21.5. In terms of the matchup, the Raptors allow the 8th most points to shooting guards. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. Checking out his last 10 road games, we can see he's only covered this in 3 of his last 10 games. Looking at his assist prop, that's at 3.5. The Raptors allow the 11th fewest assists to shooting guards. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. And if we look at his road games, he's hit this in 7 of his last 10 road games. So yeah, his assist prop, not too bad, but over 3.5 at minus 145. You can count me out on that one. So I'm not getting sucked into plays on this fella. What else is there? Trey Jones. I think we can check his assist prop in this one. His line's at 7.5. You can get that at plus 102, though. In terms of the matchup, the Raptors allow the 3rd most assists to point guards. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. And in his last 10 away games, he's only hit this in 3 of his last 10. So those numbers aren't strong enough for me. I can see him going over, but yeah, it's nothing really screaming out to me. So in this particular game, RJ Barrett rebounds, Jakob Poeltl points. They're the 2 things that interest me. Might be a 2-man same game parlay, perhaps. Jakob for 10, RJ Barrett for 4 or 5 rebounds. But if you're interested in tailing what I tell, you can see the pinned comment. The pinned comment will be updated probably an hour after I post the video. Jumping into the Chicago Bulls versus the Atlanta Hawks. Now, in this particular game, a lot of game time decisions in this one. For the Bulls, Kobe White, Alex Caruso, they're the main players who are game time decisions. For Atlanta, Capella is still out, Patty Mills and Fernando, game time decisions, but they're relatively bench players. So let's have a look at these Atlanta Hawks first. Starting with DeJounte Murray. His points prop, it's at 21.5. In terms of the matchup, the Chicago Bulls allow the 7th fewest points to shooting guards. Now, he's been very consistent until late. DeJounte Murray didn't get traded at the deadline. He's covered this in 8 of his last 10 games against the Chicago Bulls. He's gone under in 4 consecutive games. So it could be a difficult one to look at here. This is a home game for the Atlanta Hawks. Looking at his last 10 home games, he hit this in 6 out of his last 10. So the difficult thing there is the Bulls is a difficult matchup. DeJounte Murray struggled in his last 4 games against the Bulls, but his recent form is awesome. So do with that as you wish. Looking at his assist, The line is at 5.5. He's hit this in 8 of his last 10 games. The Bulls do allow the 15th most assists in the league to shooting guards, which puts him in the middle of the pack. In terms of how he's gone against the Bulls, he's hit this in 2 out of his last 4 every second game. If you believe in trends, it means his next game, which is this one, could be a very high assist recording day. But checking out his last 10 home games, we can see DeJounte Murray has covered this in 5 out of his last 10, but he's covered it in 5 out of his last 6. So, but that line, minus 139, yeah, I'm not feeling that one. Checking out his rebounds prop, though, that is also at 5.5. The Chicago Bulls allow the 4th fewest rebounds to shooting guards. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10, and he's hit this in 2 out of his last 4 against the Chicago Bulls. So, yeah, DeJounte Murray, points-wise, that's probably his most consistent prop, but he hasn't got it done against the Chicago Bulls before, so that makes me feel a little bit hesitant to touch him. Saddiq Bey, speaking of guys I want to touch, I don't want to touch him, but I probably would if I had the chance. But he's been killing it lately is what I wanted to get to. His points props at 15.5. He's hit this in 8 out of his last 10 games, Saddiq Bey. In terms of the matchup, the Bulls allow the 11th fewest points to small forwards. He's been covering this real well. Head-to-head matchups, he's gone over in 1 of his last 2 against the Chicago Bulls. And looking at his last 10 home games, Saddiq Bey has covered this in 6 out of his last 10, but 5 out of his last 6. So he's been somewhat decent. If you want to have a look at his rebound prop, his line for that is at 6.5. He's covered this in 7 out of his last 10 in head-to-head matchups against the Bulls, 4 and 8. So what I'd be interested in is looking at his points and rebounds. His line's at 22.5. He's just gone under in both of his games against the Chicago Bulls. Looking at his last 10, though, he's covered this in 8 out of his last 10 games. So the games where he didn't score the ball well, he didn't rebound that well either. But fairly consistent rebounder. He's been pretty good getting points on. The matchup is somewhat difficult, right? Check it out. Points allowed, 11th fewest. Rebounds allowed is the 12th fewest, right? But if you look at the Chicago Bulls, the power forward spot is the weak spot. So is Jalen Johnson. Outside of that, it's a pretty much difficult matchup across the court. So they got to produce somewhere. So Jalen Johnson probably has the easiest matchup for all the Atlanta Hawks players. So we'll jump into him at the moment. But if his lines are too high, Saddiq Bey might be the way to go. Jalen Johnson, here he is. Points prop. His line's at 15.5. He's hit this in 8 of his last 10 games. The Chicago Bulls allow the 4th most points to power forwards. In head-to-head matchups, Jalen Johnson's hit this in 1 of his last 5. He's only played the Chicago Bulls once this season, and he scored 10 points in that game. Let down. Checking out his last 10 games at home, he's hit this in 8 of his last 10 games at home. So he's been quite good. Jumping into his assist prop, I've been betting on his assist prop for quite some time now, and he's been treating me quite well. His line's at 3.5, and that's at plus money. The Chicago Bulls allow the 15th most assists to power forwards. He's hit this in 7 out of his last 10. Looking at his home games, he's hit this in 6 out of his last 10. So that doesn't look too great. Head-to-head matchups against the Bulls, he had 4 in his last matchup against the Chicago Bulls. That was this season, and he had gone under in all the others. Lastly, let's look at his rebound prop. Another good matchup. His line's at 9.5. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. The Bulls allow the most rebounds to power forwards. And in Jalen Johnson's games against the Bulls, he's gone under in all of them, right? So his matchup is the easiest, but the lines have been moved to cater for that matchup. Something on here is screaming out, take Jalen Johnson, because I think the line's probably just about right. So even though the matchup is perfect, we've seen him struggle with good matchups before. He has been playing quite well recently. If you just want to check his PRA to get a good glimpse of his recent form, he's hit his PRA of 28.5, 7 out of his last 10 games. He's got a good matchup for points, good matchup for rebounds and assists. His matchup is not bad. In head-to-head matchups against the Bulls, he's got under this PRA in every game against them. Most notably, probably this last game. So that was this season. Jalen Johnson played 29 minutes. He attempted 8 shots. Looking at his more recent form, he's playing 39 minutes on average. So the opportunities are definitely up. And he is attempting 14.6 shots per game. So even though he hasn't scored and hit the rebounds against this team before, he's now playing 10 more minutes than he normally would. So Jalen Johnson PRA, I don't hate it. I don't hate it at all. He's covered it quite well more recently, and the matchup is good. So do we say Fuck the fact that you've had troubles in the past. Get it done in this game, my boy. So just checking his last 10. The lowest number of minutes he's played is 34.9 minutes. So if we want to get juicy with it, right? And we want to check his last 10 games where he's played at least 35 minutes. Let's check that out. 35. Okay. Last 10 games, he's played 35 minutes. Well, you're actually going to see his last 10 games. So I just looked at the lowest amount. So that was a bloody stupid exercise. My apologies. I just woke up. Jalen Johnson over PRA. I don't hate it. That's what I'm going to say. I'm on the fence with Jalen Johnson right now. Let's check out Trae Young, though. His points prop over 23.5. The matchup, the Bulls allow the fewest points to point guards this season. Trae Young, he's hit this in 7 out of his last 10 games, this 23.5. Against the Bulls, he's gone under in 3 out of his last 4 games against them. Looking at his last 10 home games, and he's hit this in 7 out of his last 10. So his form is very good. It's just a difficult matchup. So we see a really low line there for Trae Young. Looking at his assists, though, his line's at 10.5. You can get that for plus money. So that's pretty juicy. I was calling this out as a plus EV play, which is pretty good. The Chicago Bulls allow the 15th most points. Assists to shoot point guards, which is somewhat decent in terms of the matchup. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10. And against the Bulls, he's covered it in 3 out of his last 4. So that I could definitely fuck around with. Trae Young at 10.5, when we know he's probably not going to be scoring as many points, I don't mind this. He can find Sadiq Bey, he can find Jalen Johnson, he can find a Conley. My God, he'll find people, all right. If you can, in fact, actually get Trae Young at over 10.5 for plus money, definitely something that I'd be considering. So I'm just jumping in my old sportsbook now, having a look to see what I can get it for, because these lines can move quick, especially after I post a video. I often find that lines move a fair bit and I lose out. So just having a quick look now, and I can see on 365, I can get him for 10.5 for minus 110. So that's not very good. Like, it's not bad, but it's not what I was looking for. And if I look at my other sports book, also known as Sportsbet, the biggest sports book here in Australia, Trae Young's assist prop over 10.5 for $1.96. So that's not bad. That's very close to plus money right there. I'm going to lock that in. Trae Young over 10.5. Let's book it. Who else have we got in this game? Where's my man Okongwu? Now, Okongwu, won a huge bet on him last time. Went points and rebounds. I think that was up against Philadelphia, I believe. But his points line's at 13.5. In terms of the matchup, the Bulls allow the 9th fewest points to centers. He has hit this in 5 out of his last 10. Against the Bulls, predominantly in a bench role, he scored 14, 18, 11, and 11. So these 2 games, he's played only 20 minutes. They're the 2 games he went under. He played only 20 minutes. Check this out. Last 5 games, he's playing 34.5 minutes per game. And that's because Clint Capella's not here. With Clint Capella out of the lineup, he's hit this in 4 out of his last 5, I believe. But let me just double check that. Clint Capella. Okay. Last 5 games without Clint Capella. Yeah, I was right. Yep. 4 out of his last 5 games. Houston, a pretty difficult matchup. He still played 32 minutes. He only shot 4 for 10, which is quite crazy when you think about he's mainly just shooting layups. A couple of 3-pointers, don't get me wrong, but he only took 1 3-pointer against the Rockets. It's not like he's letting them fly. So, yeah, Onyeka Okongwu, I don't mind his points prop, 13.5, but let's check his rebound prop real quick. His rebound prop's at 8.5. He's hit this in 2 out of his last 5 games. The Bulls allow the 8th fewest rebounds to centers. In his last 2 matchups, he had 6 and 6. And in those games, he only played 20 minutes. So he's playing at home now. And looking at how he plays at home, somewhat rebounds a little bit better, I'd say. But yeah, nothing screaming out to be there. I think if I was going to bet on Onyeka Okongwu, definitely the point side of things. Line at 13.5. I think 10, probably great for your parlays. He's hit that in 8 straight games now. And he's also hit that in 4 consecutive games against the Chicago Bulls. So you buy a couple points. I don't mind that for Onyeka Okongwu. Looking at these Chicago Bulls players, let's take a look at Kobe White. Matchup-wise, in terms of points, the Atlanta Hawks allow the most points to point guards on the season. Now his line's at 22.5, which is hit in 5 of his last 10. He's gone under in all of his games against the Atlanta Hawks. That's not great. And looking at his last 10 away games, he's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. The matchup is good, but form doesn't tell me he's going to hit it. Looking at his assists, you can get over 6.5 for plus money. The Hawks do allow the third most assists to point guards. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games, and he's gone under in all of his games against the Atlanta Hawks. Keeping in mind, reduced role in most of these games. He did play 37 minutes in his last game against the Hawks and still went under. So I feel like the matchup is really good, but that's partly why we're seeing, I'd say, high lines. I wouldn't be surprised to see Kobe White really cover it. He didn't cover it in the last game against them, but just because they don't cover it in one doesn't guarantee they'll go under again, right? So I do feel like he could have a good game here. It's just I'm not seeing some strong enough evidence to tell me why. In terms of rebounds, the Hawks allow the 10th most rebounds to point guards. His line of 4.5, he's covered in 8 of his last 10. You are getting minus 140 odds on this one. So a little bit juiced. Head-to-head matchups, he did have 5 rebounds in that matchup against the Atlanta Hawks. So I can see him covering this 4.5, but at minus 140, I wouldn't play that as a single bet. Let's have a look at DeMar DeRozan. Okay. Points-wise, line's at 25.5. He's covered this in 3 straight. So DeMar DeRozan lining up at the 4, plays a lot like a 3. But looking at the 4s, the Atlanta Hawks allow the most points to power forwards on the season. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. Against the Hawks, he's gone under in 2 straight. Prior to that, which was last season, he was doing much better. Looking at his assist prop, he's hit that in 3 of his last 5 games against the Hawks. The matchup is pretty good. They allow the 4th most assists to power forwards, but DeRozan, he's only hit this in 4 out of his last 10. And then rebound-wise, his line is at 4.5 for plus money. The Hawks allow the 2nd most rebounds to power forwards, but he's only hit this in 4 out of his last 10. I mean, he's gone under in 3 straight games against the Hawks. So not a big fan of betting on DeMar DeRozan. He's far too inconsistent, and you can just see it in the numbers there. Let's have a look at Nikola Vucevic, though. His points line is at 21.5. He had to sit this in 4 out of his last 5, though, so check that out. That's pretty decent. In terms of the matchup, the Hawks allow the 11th fewest points to centers on the season. Vucevic, in head-to-head matchups, got under in 4 straight games against the Hawks. Looking at his rebounds prop, his rebound prop is at 11.5. Hawks allow the 13th fewest rebounds to centers. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. And he's hit this in only 1 of his last 4 games against the Atlanta Hawks. So not getting a strong read on Nikola Vucevic either. So I think just looking at this whole game in general, the Bulls, I don't like betting on Bulls games. They play quite slow. Their best players aren't consistent. If I was to pick my favorite props there, obviously I like Trae Young's assists. If we're looking at slightly alternate lines, Sadiq Bey, don't mind Sadiq Bey at all. And Jalen Johnson, I'm a bit on the fence with him. So maybe Sadiq Bey and Onyeka Okongwu, reduce those down. That could be a good parlay. DeJounte Murray, his form is great, but he hasn't got it done against the Bulls before. So, Trae Young assist, probably my favorite prop out of this game. Let's jump into the next one. It's the New Orleans Pelicans versus the Memphis Grizzlies. So in this particular game, the Memphis Grizzlies, obviously they're missing a whole lot of players. In terms of game time decisions, D. Rose and Zaire Williams, unlikely to play. And for the Pelicans, Zion Williamson, he's a game time decision in this game. So minimal props available. We'll kick things off with CJ McCollum. Now, his points line is at 18.5. The Memphis Grizzlies, smack bang in the middle in terms of points allowed to point guards on the season. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. And head-to-head matchups against Memphis, he's hit this in 3 out of his last 6. He has gone under in his last 2. Is a road game for the Pelicans. So looking at his last 10 road games, CJ McCollum's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. So nothing real strong coming out of that prop. In terms of assists, line's at 4.5. He's only hit this in 1 out of his last 10 games, which is crazy. In terms of the matchup, the Grizzlies do allow the 8th most assists to point guards. In head-to-head matchups, he's hit this in 4 out of his last 6. But his last matchup against the Memphis Grizzlies, he only finished with 2. So, a little bit hesitant for CJ McCollum there. Next one, we're looking at his rebound prop. That's at 4.5. He's hit this in 1 of his last 6. The matchup is good, though. The Grizzlies allow the 3rd most rebounds to point guards on the season. But looking at his last 10, he's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. So the matchup is good. He hasn't got it done against the Grizzlies before, and he's got it done half the time in his most recent game. So nothing screaming out to me in terms of CJ McCollum props right there. So let's jump into the next one. We're looking at Zion Williamson. His points prop is at 21.5. In his last 10 games, he's hit this in 6 of his last 10 games. The Memphis Grizzlies allow the 10th fewest points against power forwards. In terms of that head-to-head matchup, he's hit this in 2 out of his last 5 games against the Grizz. But in their most recent matchup, he did score 23 points and cover this line. I'm not really sold on that. Rebounds, I'm not even going to waste your time with that because Zion's a really inconsistent rebounder. But looking at his assists, the Memphis Grizzlies allow the 3rd fewest assists to power forwards. He's gone under in 5 straight games against the Grizzlies. And in his last 10 games, he's covered this in 5 out of his last 10. He has covered in his last 3. So, yeah, Zion, I don't bet on him that often, and that's a very good reason as to why. But let's have a look at Vince Williams. I do bet on this guy. We did take his points and assists in his last game, which cashed in for us. But looking at this, the New Orleans Pelicans, they allow the fewest points to small forwards on the season. His points prop is at 15.5. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10 games. This is a home game for him. Looking at his last 10 home games, he's covered this in only 3 out of his last 10. So based off that, it's got me leaning towards the under already. In terms of head-to-head matchups, he's gone under in 4 straight, but he was only playing big minutes in 2 of those games. So, yeah, definitely leaning the under for Vince Williams' points. But looking at his other props, assist-wise, he's been passing the ball quite well. The Pelicans allow the 7th fewest assists to small forwards. He's hit this in 3 consecutive games, though. So his lines move up to 4.5. Prior to that, it used to sit at around 3.5, but given his recent form, that's now moved. Even with that, in head-to-head matchups, he's only got 3 in his last 2. So, yeah, still kind of leaning the under, but probably best to avoid it. Rebound-wise, he's inconsistent as hell. It's at 6.5. Difficult matchup. Pelicans allow the 4th fewest rebounds. So, I think really just taking the under on his PRA might be a good play here. Based on the matchup, you can see up here on the top right, difficult matchup for points, rebounds, and assists for someone like Vince Williams. Now, he's going to be chasing around, I imagine, Brandon Ingram. So he's going to have his hands full defensively. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. In his last 2 matchups, he's finished on 19 and 17 PRA. So the 26.5 could be quite a stretch for him. In his last 5 games where he has gone over this PRA, 4 out of those 5 games, he smashed his points line. 18, 25, 20, and 19 points. Almost got a triple-double in this game here against the Chicago Bulls. But outside of that, he hasn't been hitting this. So it's going to be difficult for him to score. His rebounds are a bit inconsistent. His assists have been good the last 3 games. But, yeah, I think it might be a little bit difficult. There's good blowout potential in this game too. I don't mind that. Vince Williams under in his PRA. Having a look at Jonas Valanciunas. Now, this guy always seems to be somewhat injured, but let's have a quick look at his. His points prop is at 13.5. In terms of the matchup, the Grizzlies allow the 10th most points to centers. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. In head-to-head matchups, he's done quite well in the 2 most recent games, 22 and 17 points. But prior to that, not much success. Looking at his rebound prop, lines at 9.5. He's hit this in 3 consecutive games against the Memphis Grizzlies, though. The matchup's good. The Grizzlies are the 2nd most rebounds to centers, so he's taken full advantage of that. But in his last 10 games, he's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. What I'd be interested to see is his minutes, and he's averaging 22.9 minutes per game. Clippers, he only played 10, but it looks like in his last 2 games, he's back to playing his normal minutes. So in his last 3 games against the Grizz, he played 29, 32, and 36 minutes. I don't see him playing that many. Over his last 10, he hasn't played those types of minutes anyway, so that could limit his rebound opportunities. So I understand the matchup is very good. I wouldn't be surprised to see him get 10 rebounds against the Grizzlies, but I'm not a big fan of Jonas Valanciunas right now, so we'll pump the brakes on him. We also have Jaren Jackson Jr. We'll just look at his points prop in this one. His line's at 26.5. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. In terms of the matchup, the New Orleans Pelicans allow the 4th fewest points to centers on the season. Power forward, sorry. He's lining up at center where the matchup's supposed to be a little bit easier. Jaren Jackson Jr. at 26.5. I'm a little bit hesitant. In head-to-head matchups, he's only covered this in 1 out of his last 7 games against the Pelicans. So, yeah, even though he's been scoring quite well, very much matchup related. So, he's their main scorer for the Grizzlies, so he'll get his opportunities, but it also means easier to game plan against. Having a look at Brandon Ingram. His points line is at 23.5. In terms of the matchup, the Memphis Grizzlies allow the fourth fewest points to shooting guards. Vince Williams would probably pick up the assignment on Brandon Ingram. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. Against the Grizzlies, he's covered this in 2 consecutive games now, covering in 3 out of his last 6. This is a road game, so let's check Brandon Ingram on the road. And he's covered this in 3 out of his last 10 road games. So the matchup's supposed to be difficult. His recent form's a little bit average, but he has smoked the Grizzlies in his last 2. Looking at his assists, he's covered this in 9 of his last 20, 4 out of his last 10. The matchup is somewhat decent. And against the Grizzlies, he's covered in 2 of his last 6. So we're not getting a strong read there. And looking at his rebounds, mine's at 5.5. He's covered this in 3 out of his last 4 games against the Grizzlies, which is good. And in his last 10, he's covered this in 6 out of his last 10. Matchup-wise, Grizzlies allowed the 9th fewest rebounds to shooting guards. So I'd still be a little bit hesitant to take Brandon Ingram. Obviously, you can take him for 4. He's hit that in 10 consecutive games. But taking his full prop, I'm not sold on BI. And outside of that, there's no one else that really grabs my attention. So for this particular game, I've been leaning the under on a Vince Williams PRA. The Pelicans are somewhat deep, meaning they can get 15 to 20 points from 5 different players. So a little bit hesitant to take any of those props. But we're jumping into the Denver Nuggets versus the Milwaukee Bucks. Few game time decisions. Dame Lillard, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Chris Middleton is out for the Nuggets. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Michael Porter Jr., their game time decisions in this game. So let's take a look at the players which are currently available. We'll start with the Bucks players. Dame Dollar, his points line is at 25.5. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. The matchup, the Nuggets allow the 10th fewest points to point guards. His last matchup against the Nuggets, he only scored 18 points. Played 35 minutes. He shot 5 for 13 from the field. So he didn't have a great game against them. Looking at his assists, his line's at 6.5. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. The Nuggets allow the 10th fewest assists to point guards. When his last matchup against the Bucks, he had 5 assists against the Nuggets. Sorry, not the Bucks. So he had a pretty poor game against them last time. This is a home game, so looking at his last 10 home games, perhaps. Last 10 home games, he's covered this in 5 out of his last 10. So, look, Dame's still a great player. His recent form's a little bit patchy. The matchup is supposed to be difficult, so I wouldn't feel confident taking him, especially his game time decision for a reason, right? So he could be somewhat injured, so I'd be a little bit hesitant to play him. Let's have a look at Giannis Antetokounmpo. His points prop, 30.5. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. In terms of the matchup, 18th, meaning the Denver Nuggets are the 18th fewest points to power forwards. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. He's scored quite well against the Denver Nuggets, 33, 31, and then 29. Last 10 games, we'll look at his last 10 at home. Last 10 home games, he's only covered this line twice. So, I've been yelling out on these videos just to take Giannis's under in his PRA, which has been cashing quite well lately. But let's have a look at his assist prop. Line's at 6.5. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. The Nuggets allow the 17th fewest assists. So again, that's middle of the table in terms of a matchup. In his head-to-head matchups against the Nuggets, he's gone under this line in 3 consecutive games. So hasn't got the assists against the Denver Nuggets. Looking at his rebounds, his line's at 11.5. He's covered this in 2 out of his last 3 games against the Nuggets. And in his last 10, he's covered this in 4 out of his last 10. Matchup-wise, the Nuggets do allow the 7th most rebounds. So, look, if I was going to bet on Giannis, it would probably be his rebound prop, but still somewhat hesitant. Points and assists, I didn't really like that for him. So, if we have a look at his points and assist line, he's covered that in 4 out of his last 10. When he does hit it, he absolutely smashes it. When he doesn't, he goes well under. Head-to-head matchups, he's gone under his points and assist line in all 3 games, but it has been pretty tight. So I won't be looking to fade Giannis in this one, but if I did want to bet on anything Giannis related, it would probably be his rebounds. Who else are we going to take a look at here? Let's have a look at Brook Lopez. His line's at 11.5. He's got a good matchup. The Denver Nuggets allow the 7th most points to centers on the season. In his last 10 games, he's covered this line 6 times. And in head-to-head matchups, he's covered this in 2 out of his last 3. Only a couple of weeks ago, he scored 19 points against the Denver Nuggets, easily covering this line. And in that game, he played 34 minutes, shot the ball 13 times. In his last 10 games, he's averaging 10.5 shot attempts per game. So That 13 is one of the higher ones he's taken. So with the right matchup, we can see him get busy. But yeah, look, I don't mind this. He's playing at home. So let's say Brook Lopez's last 10 games at home. And you can see he's covered this in 6 out of his last 10 home games. Line's at 11.5. He's hit 10 points in 9 out of his last 10 home games. The matchup is pretty good. So we're probably looking at parlays. Brook Lopez for 10 points. I don't mind. Let's have a look at his rebound line. It's at 4.5, which is quite low. He did only have 2 rebounds against the Denver Nuggets last time. He has hit this in 6 out of his last 10, and the Denver Nuggets allow the 6th fewest rebounds to centers. So makes a lot of sense. Brook Lopez for 10 points. I don't mind that. Won't touch his rebound prop at all. And let's jump into the Joker, shall we? Let's do a deep dive on this fella. His line is at 27.5 points. The Milwaukee Bucks allow the 4th most points to centers. So he's got a really good matchup here, Nikola Jokic. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. In head-to-head matchups, 31 and 25 in his last 2, so nothing major. Looking at his last 10 road games, he's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 as well. So in terms of his points prop, look, he'll get 20, but can he get 25? 27.5. That I do not know. So, but looking at his assist prop, we can see the Bucks allow the 2nd most assists to the center position this season. He's covered this assist line of 8.5 in 5 out of his last 10 games. Against the Milwaukee Bucks, he's had 11 and 12. So easily covering his line the last 2 games against the Bucks. The matchup is very good. His form's inconsistent, but, you know, how many games in a row does Jokic normally go without cracking double figures, 2 max. So 7 assists in his last game against the Kings. The Nuggets were blown out. I can see the Nuggets playing a lot better in this one. And normally when they're playing a lot better, Jokic is setting up a lot of buckets. So assists, I don't mind that particularly Jokic, but if you're going to take his assists, you might as well take a triple-double, right? But looking at his rebounds prop, his line's at 12.5. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. The Bucks allow the 8th most rebounds to centers on the season. Head-to-head matchups, he had 16 in their most recent matchup, but only 6 in the matchup prior to that. Looking at his last 10 games on the road, we can see he's covered this line in only 3 of his last 10. Speaking of the road, I don't remember if I checked his assist prop, but checking his last 10 games on the road, he's covered his assist prop in 5 out of his last 10. So nothing major happening there either. Matchup is very good for points, rebounds, and assists for Nikola Jokic. For me, my favorite prop would probably be the assist prop. Points and rebounds, I'm a little bit uncertain. So Nikola Jokic assists, definitely where I'm leaning. Michael Porter Jr., let's check his points prop real quick. 14.5 is the line. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. The Bucks only allow the 14th fewest points to the small forward position. In head-to-head matchups, he's gone over once and under the other time. So, a little bit hesitant to take Michael Porter Jr. here. He didn't play in the last game, actually. He was late out against the Sacramento Kings. So, I don't know what's wrong with him. Illness, injury, whatever it is. I'm not going to be touching him. Aaron Gordon and Jamal Murray. We'll have a look at those two. Let's start with AG first. Points prop. It's at 12.5. Jeez, I just lifted my table up by accident. Matchup. The Milwaukee Bucks allow the 4th fewest points to power forwards. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10 games. Matching up against the Milwaukee Bucks, he's gone under in his last 2, scoring 9 and 8 points. So I'm not really feeling that one for AG, to be honest. Let's have a look at his other props. Looking at his assists real quick, his line's at 2.5. We're not entertaining that type of bullshit. Looking at his rebounds, line's at 5.5. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10. Again, it's a difficult matchup. The Bucks allow the 4th fewest rebounds. And in head-to-head matchups, he has rebounded well. 14, 7, and 6. So he's covered this line in 3 straight. Still wouldn't take the over, to be honest, because his recent form's a little bit, how you going? But Aaron Gordon, prefer not to make any plays on you tonight, my man. Jamal Murray, he's got a good matchup when it comes to scoring points. We know that for sure. Milwaukee Bucks allow the 2nd most points to point guards on the season. His line's at 22.5. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10 games. Last 2 games against the Bucks, 26 and 35 points. So the matchup was good. His recent form is all over the place, but the matchup is good, and he's taken advantage of them in the past. So I don't mind that for Jamal Murray. Taking it over in his points prop, perhaps. Looking at his assists, the Bucks allow the 8th fewest assists to point guards on the season. And that makes sense because the Bucks just let point guards score on them. So assists, they make it a little bit difficult. But in head-to-head matchups, He only had 5 assists in his last matchup against the Milwaukee Bucks, 9 assists the matchup prior. So in this one, I'm thinking of a somewhat value play, maybe over in points, under an assist for Jamal Murray, but I haven't run those value plays in quite some time. Look, I definitely do like his points prop here against the Bucks, who just leak buckets against point guards. Let's jump into the next game, shall we? Looking at the New York Knicks versus the Houston Rockets. Now, only the Rockets players are available at the moment, and that's because Alfred Sengun, he's a game time decision in this one. And for the Knicks, not Precious Achua, Isaiah Hartenstein, he's a game time decision. Jericho Sims, game time decision as well. They're still missing Anunoby, Randall, and Robinson. But having a look, what do we have here? Let's check out Dante DiVincenzo. So he's been taking a lot of shots ever since Julius Randle went out. He finally had a bad game, scoring only 14 points in that last game against the Indiana Pacers. His line's at 19.5. He's covered that in 6 out of his last 10. The Houston Rockets allow the 9th fewest points to shooting guards. In head-to-head matchups, DiVincenzo only scored 5 points against them last time, but he only played 19 minutes. Interesting stat there. On the road, apparently he's struggled. Checking out his road games, and he has. He's covered in 3 out of his last 10 road games, DiVincenzo. So a little bit hesitant to take his points prop. But if he's not scoring, he might be passing the ball. The Rockets are the 10th fewest assists to shooting guards. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10. Looking at his road games, he's only gone over in 2 out of his last 10. So DiVincenzo, we're not fucking around with you today, my boy. Jalen Brunson, though. His points line is at 30.5 points. The matchup, the Rockets allow the 6th fewest points to point guards. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10. His last matchup against the Rockets, he did finish on 30 points. Looking at his road games, Jalen Brunson's only covered this line in 2 of his last 10 games on the road. So that makes me a little bit hesitant. Looking at his assists, his line's at 6.5. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10. The Houston Rockets allow the fewest assists to point guards. Jalen Brunson had 7 assists in their last matchup against them. So Jalen Brunson, his lines are a little bit high, so I'd prefer not to bet on him, for being honest. Isaiah Hartenstein, if I was going to bet on him, it's usually just his rebound prop. But points-wise, he's done quite well. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 6, believe it or not. He's gone under in all of his games against the Houston Rockets. And looking at his, looking at his rebounds, had 11 rebounds in his last matchup against Houston, which is good. Last 10, he's gone over his rebound line in 6 out of his last 10. The matchup, the Rockets allow the 17th fewest rebounds to center. So the matchup, not the easiest one. But look, given he's a game time decision, we don't know if there's going to be a minutes restriction or what. So I'll probably wait till Isaiah Hartenstein gets a little bit more consistent. Let's look at Josh Hart. And we'll probably just look at his rebounds, really. Points-wise, you'd have to be a madman to bet on his points. Looking at his boards, his line's at 8.5, and he's only covered this in 8 consecutive games, which is crazy. Now, the Houston Rockets, they do allow the 7th fewest rebounds against small forwards. So it says the matchup might be difficult. Who gives a fuck, Josh Hart says, because in his last matchup against the Houston Rockets, he pulled down 14 rebounds. Eat that, motherfucker. But look, Josh Hart, rebounding like an absolute madman. You'd be crazy to take the under here, right? And if you can get 8.5, but it's minus 135, you see. Now that makes me a little bit hesitant. So I'd take a look at Josh Hart's rebound line, 8.5. And if you can get better odds, if you can get about 110 for this, definitely something worth considering. But he's been consistent as hell with that. Looking at his assists, his line's at 4.5. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10, but the matchup is difficult when it comes to assists. He only had 1 assist in their last matchup against them. So, yeah, that's Josh Hart for you. Well, we've got 3 more games to go, and I am starting to fatigue, and I am starting to sweat, but let's go. Let me get some H2O into me, and then I'll rip straight into the Dallas Mavericks versus the Washington Wizards. Woo! All right, let's get it going. Game time decision. Who is it? Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, Maxi Kleber. All game time decisions for the Dallas Mavericks in this game, but they're most likely to play. So let's check my man, Luka Doncic. His points line is at 32.5. He has hit this in 7 out of his last 10 games. The Washington Wizards allow the 17th fewest points to point guard, so it's an average matchup for Luka Doncic. In head-to-head matchups against the Wizard, 22, 41, and 26 points. I will not be paying Luka Doncic's points prop in this game. But looking at his assist prop, line's at 9.5. The Washington Wizards allow the third most assists to point guards. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. And against the Wizards, he's gone 6, 6, and then 10 assists in their more recent matchup. Looking at his rebounds prop now, that's at 8.5. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. The Wizards allow the 6th most rebounds to point guards. Luka Doncic has gone 9, 15, and 7. So nothing screaming out to me here. Maybe if we just look at his rebounds and assists, but I think that's going to show that he's gone under more often than not. Yeah, he's gone under in 2 out of the 3. So, yeah, Luka's lines in a matchup where there's a probability of a blowout. Kyrie plays, might be difficult for Luka to hit these numbers. So, look, he's going to probably have a great game nonetheless. He'll fill up the stat sheet. But at these odds, I don't think that's worth playing. I wouldn't normally look at Josh Green, but he's been a quiet achiever, and you can see it in his points prop there. His line's at 9.5. He's hit this in 7 out of his last 10 games. When I say hit this, he's almost doubled it, right? He's had almost 4 games where he's doubled this points prop, which is pretty amazing. The Washington Wizards allow the 5th most points to small forwards. Josh Green has been getting it done lately. Head-to-head matchups. Wow, this game he scored 0 points and played 36 minutes. He only attempted 4 shots. Looking at his last 10 games, though, where he has been banging off his head, he's averaging 9.3 attempts and 32.5 minutes played. So Josh Green could be a quiet achiever to get it done. Let's quickly look at his 3 points prop. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. His points prop, over 1.5. He's hit this in 8 of his last 10 games. And this you can also get at plus 105. So that's pretty juicy. Yeah, 8 out of his last 10 is pretty good. He's hit this in 1 of his last 3 games against Washington, but his last game against them, he shot 0 for 4. Looking at his last 10 games, how often does he do that? It's 1 game against the Magic, he was 0 for 3. Last game against OKC, played 27 minutes and only attempted 1 shot. But against this Washington Wizards team, he could be someone who really gets it on here. So don't mind his points prop, but I think I like the 3-point prop a little bit better because he just needs to make 2 shots. If I was looking at his points prop, I'd probably just take him for like 15 or 20 and risk it here because he's either going to get real involved. I don't think it's easy to get sharp with somebody whose activity is low like Josh Green's. As you can see, he's either killing it or going well under. So I'm not too sure. I'll think about it, but I don't mind Josh Green for some value there. Kyrie Irving. Let's have a look at my man, Kyrie swerving. His point line's at 25.5. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. The Wizards allow the 5th most points to shooting guards. He's going to put on some highlights, but can he hit this prop? I'm not too sure. Since he's come back from injury, he's a bit hit and miss. Came back against the Philadelphia 76ers, so he's only covered this in 1 of his last 4 games. Looking at his assists, the Wizards allow the 2nd most assists to shooting guards, but he's only hit this in 2 or 4 games since he's come back from injury. And the line's at 6.5. You can get that for plus money. And then if we look at his rebounds, that line's at 5.5. Again, good matchup. The Wizards allow the 2nd most rebounds to shooting guards, but he's only hit this in 1 or 4 games since he's come back. So Kyrie, very similar to Luka Doncic. His lines are quite high. The matchup is very easy for him, but lines are high for a reason. So I think it's quite sharp. So I'm a little bit hesitant to play either of those guys. Kyle Kuzma, his points line is at 20.5. Now he does have a good matchup here. The Dallas Mavericks allow the 4th most points to power forwards. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. He's hit this in 3 consecutive games against the Dallas Mavericks. So don't mind that for Kyle Kuzma. I don't like betting on him because he's screwed me over more often than not, but he's got a good matchup and he's hit it against the Dallas Mavericks before. Let's just quickly check his road form to see if there are any flags to really worry about. Last 10 games on the road, he's only hit this in 3 out of his last 10, but his last road game in Dallas, he scored 30 points, and the Wizards won that game by 1 point. Looking at his assist prop, his line's at 4.5. The Mavericks allow the 5th most assists to power forwards. He's only hit this in 1 out of his last 3 games against Dallas, and in his last 10 games, he has hit this 6 times. So, yeah, it's not so bad. Rebound-wise, his line for that is at 6.5 as well. He's only hit this in 2 out of his last 10 games. The Mavs allow the 12th most rebounds to power forwards, and Kuzma's gone under his rebound prop in 2 consecutive games against the Dallas Mavericks. So, yeah, not loving the rebounds. Points, yeah, probably. I just don't like betting on Kyle Kuzma, if I'm being honest with you. Tyus Jones, we'll check out his points and his assist prop. In terms of the points, the Mavs allow the 11th fewest points to point guards. His prop line's at 13.5. He's hit this in 4 straight, but he's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. Against the Dallas Mavericks, his only matchup, he scored 12 points against them. Assist-wise, he did have 2 assists in that game against Dallas, and in his last 10 games, he's hit this assist prop of 7.5 in 7 out of his last 10. The Mavs do allow the 11th fewest assist to point guards, though. So matchup somewhat difficult. He hasn't got it done against them in the past, but his recent form is very good. If you're a big believer in picking players because of their recent form, Tyus Jones for assists, definitely not the worst play that you could make. Denny Advia, his points line is at 13.5. He has hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. Dallas Mavericks allow the 9th fewest points to small forwards. Denny Advia has hit this in his last 2 games against Dallas. Assists, his props at 3.5. The Mavericks allow the 12th most assists to small forwards. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games, and he's hit this in 2 out of his last 3 games against the Dallas Mavericks. Looking at his rebounds, his line's at 7.5. The Mavericks allow the 12th most rebounds to small forwards. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games, and in his last 3 games against the Mavs, he's hit this once. So nothing for Denny screaming out to me. Let's have a look at Jordan Poole, though. Rocks or diamonds right here. His points props at 14.5, and you get that for plus 105. The Dallas Mavericks allow the 7th most points to shooting guard, so the matchup is good. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10 games, and against Dallas, he scored 16 points the last time they met. Looking at his assists, he's hit this 4.5 line in 4 out of his last 10 games. Recent stretch where he's been passing the ball quite well. The Mavs allow the 9th most assists to shooting guards, and in head-to-head matchups, he had 3 assists in that game. So, yeah, not much I'm really feeling in this game, I've got to tell you. So if I had to look at all this, it's probably Josh Green or Kyle Kuzma, but I'm not getting a strong vibe out of either of them, really. So might choose to fade this game. Let's jump into the next one. It's a Golden State Warriors versus the Utah Jazz. Chris Paul is still out, and no major outs, to be honest, in this game. So we get to have a good look at all of our favorite players in this one. Let's start with Steph Curry. How great was that game winner that he hit against the Phoenix Suns? What an absolutely wild shot. This man just defying his father time, isn't he? His points prop, 29.5. The Utah Jazz allow the 12th fewest points to point guards. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. In head-to-head matchups, he scored 33 points in his last game against the Jazz, but this was in November of 2022. And Steph Curry's still great, but he's not the same player he was a few years ago. So the matchup's somewhat difficult. I don't know. Can Steph Curry maintain this brilliance? Can he put 3 30-plus games together? Well, he did it here. So, yeah, he absolutely could. But I don't have a strong lean towards an over or an under for Steph Curry on this one. It is a road game, so let's check him, Steph Curry on the road. He's hit this in 2 out of his last 10 road games, and he's hit this in 6 out of his last 20 road games. So not getting a strong read for Steph Curry there. But looking at his assists, his assist props at 4.5. Now, the Utah Jazz allow the most assists to point guards in the league this season. So this is quite low and might be something that I can fuck with because the matchup is really good. 4.5, though, is pretty juiced. Minus 154. That doesn't get me aroused. He had 4 assists in his last matchup against them, but that was in 2022. So given the odds, yeah, I'm not loving this pick. At 5.5, you can probably get plus money, but then at 5.5, it gets a little bit risky, right? So he's hit this line in 13 of his last 20 games, though, the 4.5. If we wanted to get sexy with it and take the 5.5, he's hit that in 12 out of his last 20 games, which is a 60% hit rate, and you'll get that at plus money, and he's got a great matchup. He's been scoring like a lunatic, so they're probably doing their best to stop him from scoring, maybe turn into a facilitator. I don't mind that for Steph Curry, the 5.5 assists, but there might be some better plays on the board here. Let's have a look at Jonathan Kuminga. He's really come alive in the last few weeks. Check that out. His points props at 20.5. He's hit this in 7 out of his last 10 games. In terms of the matchup, the Utah Jazz allow the 2nd most points to power forwards. He's been hitting this line quite well. Last matchup against the Jazz, scored 9 points again. This is 2022, so I'm not even going to entertain those stats. Kuminga in 2022, much different to Kuminga today. 20.5 points. He can clearly get there, and he's shown that. The matchup is very good. Let's check his activity. He's playing 34 minutes a night over his last 10. He's averaging 15.8 field goal attempts. So I think the worst game that he had was against Atlanta, right? And in that game, he only took 12 shots. He also got fouled out in that game. but Steph Curry scored like 60-something points. It was always going to be difficult for Kuminga. I don't see Steph Curry going off his head, scoring 40-plus points in this game. And if that's the case, Jonathan Kuminga is going to have to step up to score some points. So I don't mind his points prop, I've got to tell you. If it was 19.5, probably eat that up straight away. The 20.5, I'm a little bit hesitant, and especially at these odds. But I don't mind this, Jonathan Kuminga, that's for sure. Let's have a real quick look at his assist prop here. It's at 2.5. He's hit this 6 out of 10 games. The Jazz allow the most assists to power forwards on the season. Looking at Kuminga's away games, last 10 games on the road, woo! He's hit this in 5 straight games on the road. Jonathan Kuminga. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? I don't mind this at all. Now let's check his rebound prop. If we get a little bit spicy with that one, we'll probably have a look at his PRA. So his rebound prop's at 5.5. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. The matchup for rebounds is not difficult, but it's not as easy as the other ones. Let's look at his points and his assist prop to see maybe there's something scandalous going on over here. So he's hit this in 6 out of his last 10. He has gone under in 3 straight, though. Points and assist, he does have a good matchup. Yeah, I'd probably be, I'm not too sure here. Might take a same game multi. Maybe we can take Jonathan Kuminga for 15 points because we're a little bit on the fence with that one. And if his assist line is at 2.5, 15 points and 2 assists perhaps. It really depends on the odds, but I'll check it all after. But I do like Jonathan Kuminga to get after it. If I was going to pick a single, probably his assist prop. I do like that a little bit better. Who else is there? Klay Thompson. I'm sick of looking at his bloody lines because he's all over the place. Lines at 14.5, which is quite low. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. The Utah Jazz allow the 8th fewest points to shooting guards on the season. So difficult matchup here for Klay Thompson. 14.5, though, is quite low. That means his line has been coming down. The matchup's going to be difficult. I'd prefer not to fuck with Klay Thompson in this one. Let's have a look at these Jazz players. So Chris Dunn, I want to look at his assist prop because sometimes he gets real busy with it. His line for assists is at 5.5. The Golden State Warriors allow the 6th most assists to point guards. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. So that's not very strong. Let's have a look at Colin Sexton. So firstly, his points prop is at 19.5. The Golden State Warriors allow the 11th fewest points to shooting guards, but they allow the 3rd most points to point guards. So Colin Sexton, if you look on RotoWire, then he's starting as a shooting guard. But if you watch them play, he plays a lot of point guards. So it's really interchangeable for him. But looking at his prop, 19.5, he's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. Last matchup against the Warriors was a long time ago, so I wouldn't worry about that. He has burnt me a few times, though, so I'm not going to take his points prop. I'm a little bit hesitant with that one, but maybe there's something juicy happening with his assist prop. Let's check that out. He's hit his assist line of 5.5 in 7 out of his last 10 games. The Warriors allow the 5th most assists to point guards, but they allow the fewest assists to shooting guards. So now Colin Sexton is a combo guard, so I'm just hesitant really to take him on either because he could have a really good matchup or a really hard matchup, and then you're fucked, right, if you get it wrong. So Sexton, we're not going to play him. We're going to have a look at Lauri Markkanen, though, in this one. His points prop is 23.5. Looking at power forwards, the Golden State Warriors allow the 12th most points to power forwards. He's hit this in 4 of his last 10 games. So that doesn't give me much confidence. Looking at his rebound prop, he's hit this line of 8.5 in 5 out of his last 10 games. But the Warriors, they do allow the 4th most rebounds to power forwards. Laurie had 16 rebounds the last time they played. But again, December 2022. So it's been a lot of time. So even with that, I'm a little bit hesitant. I wonder if there's any lines for John Collins. Yes, there is. Now, this is a Jazz player that I can get behind. But his line's at 16.5 now, which is quite high. The Warriors allow the 10th most points to centers on the season. Line of 16.5. He's hit in only 4 out of his last 10. But his actual line in these games, he's hit quite well. His line's normally 12.5, 13.5, 14.5. Now we see it 16.5. So now it gets a little bit tricky. 4 out of his last 10. Looking at his rebound prop, he's been doing a great job there too, but his line's at 8.5. I think that game against Phoenix, I took his over. And I think in this game, his line was only 6.5 and he pulled down 14. So matchup-wise, the Warriors allow the 11th fewest rebounds to centers. So he's been absolutely spanking this line. 8.5. He's hit that in 8 of his last 10 games. I just want to check his rebounds at home. At home, he's hit this in 3 straight, really, but 4 out of his last 10. But I think the sports books have caught up on the John Collins bets. It's, we used to have lines of 5.5 rebounds, 6.5 rebounds. And like I said, points are about 12.5 to 13.5. But those have really been lifted. And it's not like he's got the easiest matchup in the world. So, yeah, I'm not real keen on taking any plays on John Collins right now. I got to tell you. Let's jump into the last game. It's the Minnesota Timberwolves versus the Los Angeles Clippers. Jaden McDaniels for the Timberwolves. He's a game time decision. Other than that, everyone looks like they're going to suit up to play. Let's check out the beard first. James Harden. His points prop over 16.5. The Minnesota Timberwolves, they allow the least points overall in the league. And how they defend point guards, they allow the 4th fewest points to point guards. Now, James Harden, his line of 16.5. Oh, bless me, my Lord. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. Last game against the Timberwolves in January, he only scored 14 points. So, yeah, I'd be a little bit hesitant to back his points prop. Checking his assist prop here. The Timberwolves allow the 6th fewest assists to point guards. Now, he's only hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. Last matchup against the Timberwolves, he had 8 assists, right? So, under, matchup hard, gone under both times. Looking at his rebounds, the Timberwolves allow the 3rd fewest rebounds to point guard. So it's a difficult matchup. James Harden's hit this in 8 of his last 10 games, though. Against the Timberwolves, only had 1 rebound. So has struggled in all 3 props against the Minnesota Timberwolves when they played earlier this season. Recent form, his rebounds have been okay, but I think I'm not alone when I say this, but the Los Angeles Clippers players have been burning the holes in a lot of people's pockets, right? So they're just very inconsistent. You don't know who's going to go off. So we'll see if anyone has a great matchup in this one, though. Looking at Rudy Gobert for the Minnesota Timberwolves. His points prop, over 13.5 points. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10. The Los Angeles Clippers allow the least points to centers on the season, though. So he's hit this in 6 out of his last 10. And he has hit this in 3 consecutive games against the Los Angeles Clippers. So the difficulty in the matchup may not apply to someone like Rudy Gobert. Looking at his boards, that's at 12.5. The Clippers allow the 3rd fewest rebounds to centers, but he's eaten up the Clippers, covering this in 3 out of his last 4. Looking at his last 10 games, he's covered this in 6 out of his last 10. So if we want to look at points and rebounds, he's covered this line of 25.5 in 7 out of his last 10 games. The matchup over here says it's going to be difficult for him. But when you check to see how he's gone in head-to-head games, he had 33 points when they last matched, 33 points and rebounds, 15 points and 18 rebounds in their last matchup against the Clippers. So you probably need to check, did Zubac play in that game? I'm not too sure. But Gobert, difficult matchup, but he's got it done against the Clippers before. Anthony Edwards. His points prop is 25.5. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10 games. The Clippers allow the 18th fewest points to shooting guards, which puts him in the middle of the pack. Anthony Edwards, last game against the Clippers, scored 33 points. So he absolutely blitzed them. Looking at his assists, lines at 5.5. He had 6 assists in his last matchup against them, and he's covered this in only 3 out of his last 10. The Clippers allow the 11th fewest assists to shooting guards. Looking at his rebounds, lines at 4.5. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. Matchup is in the middle of the pack. Last time he played the Clippers, he had 9 rebounds. So he played very well. He covered every single line, Anthony Edwards, but that was only the last game against the Clippers. His form is inconsistent as hell, and I think it always will be. So he's a very difficult man to pick. Karl Anthony Towns, I rarely ever bet on this guy, but let's have a look. In terms of the matchup, the Clippers allow the 8th fewest points to power forwards. His props at 22.5. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. Last matchup against the Clippers, he only scored 17 points. He also has a rebound line of 6.5. He only had 6 rebounds against the Clippers, but the matchup is good. The Clippers allow the 6th most rebounds to power forwards on the season. Towns has hit this in 5 out of his last 10, but at odds of 136, yeah, I don't know if I could take that for Karl Anthony Towns. Let's have a look at Zubac in this one. We'll check to see his minutes firstly. Yeah, he's still only playing about 20 minutes per game, so that makes me a little bit hesitant. Points-wise, he's hit this line of 8.5 in 5 out of his last 10. Difficult matchup for points and rebounds for Zubac. So points-wise, recent form's not great. Rebound-wise, recent form's not great either. Up against Gobert, he's done okay, but he played 28 minutes in this game, got 9 rebounds. He's only playing about 20 minutes a night at the moment, and his line's at 7.5. I don't know if I'm man enough to take Zubac on that one. Kawhi Leonard. 25.5 points. Let's check this out. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10 games. Difficult matchup. Every matchup is going to be difficult, really, because the Timberwolves are the number 1 defense in the league. He's hit this in 5 out of his last 10. Last time he played the Timberwolves, he finished on 26 points. Looking at his rebound prop, though, I wouldn't look at his assists. Rebound props at 6.5. He had 9 rebounds in that last game against Minnesota. His last 10 games, he's hit this in 6 out of his last 10, but he has gone under in 3 consecutive games. So, yeah, Kawhi Leonard, I'm a little bit hesitant to touch him. And then Paul George, and this guy's probably the most inconsistent, or he's consistently under, and then he does these games where he just erupts. So his points props at 20.5. The Minnesota Timberwolves allow the 13th fewest points to small forwards. He's hit this in 2 out of his last 10 games. Against the Timberwolves, he's got 16 points in the last matchup, but he did score 25 in the matchup prior to that. Assist-wise, you can get good value for this. His line's at 2.5. He's hit this now in 6 consecutive games. And I've bet on him a few times to cover his assist prop, and he's delivered. The odds are still somewhat decent. Last matchup against the Wolves, he had 3 assists. And the other 2 games prior to that, he was able to cover as well. So I don't mind this for Paul George. This is a home game. So let's just check his last 10 home games. He's covered it in his last 3. 7 of his last 10 home games, Paul George has covered this assist prop. So I'm going to jump into a sportsbook now before that line moves on me. 2.5, I can fuck with. That's a very easy line for anybody to get. Sometimes people get those by accident. So checking my sportsbooks now to see what types of odds I can get for it. Paul George on this one, that's pretty weak, $1.74. So that's pretty juiced. I'm checking Bet365 to see what the other odds are that we can get. Paul George assists. Where you at, my boy? Line's at 2.5. There we go. $1.90. That's minus 110. I'm all over that one. PG. Beat Bet365 over 2.5 assists. Let's go. So that's why it's always important to do your line shopping. You'd be surprised at the different odds that you're going to get. I try to aim for odds over $1.90, which is minus 110, I believe. So Paul George, I do like that. Looking at his rebounds, though, line's at 4.5. He's hit this in 6 out of his last 10. He only had 4 rebounds in the last matchup against the Timberwolves. So, yeah, looking at this, definitely the assist side of thing. His recent form's good. He's won me some money more recently, just taking his assist. I think he can do it. He's at home as well. Expect the Clippers to play even better. Maybe the Timberwolves defense on the road might not be as strong, but only time will. Now, that's a wrap on the preview for the 10 games. And you probably noticed it, but I started to really fatigue towards the end here. So I've been recording for an hour and 45 minutes at least. I'll edit some things out, but there's going to be a lot of film that you guys are. Yeah, you don't have to watch this, right? But check this out. I'm still in my work uniform. What a crazy day. I worked my 10 hours, got up early, got my girl ready for daycare, went to work, worked my 9-10 hours, came home, tried to be the best dad I possibly could be, put everybody to bed, made dinner, tidied up, jumped straight into the lab. Still haven't changed, still in my work uniform. It's almost 10:30 p.m. at night here, and I did that all just for you guys, to give you all the information that you need. So if you did make it this far, I do appreciate you. You got to like this video. You got to sub if you haven't already, because I'm doing this every single day, doing it for the sports bettors across the world. So look, best of luck on whatever you do decide to pick. What I encourage you to do is make sure you do research on your own bets. You can obviously use Outlier the way that I'm using it. I do have a 7-day free trial. You can jump into that. It's linked in the description box below. But I'll see you guys in the next one. Best of luck to you. Peace.
Sub to the channel because your boy's getting busy. Coming to you live from the west side of Sydney. We've got the free picks and the juice on the daily. It's all free. You don't even have to pay me.